Hey, I just finished this BBL, and I know, everyone knows, that not all of this fat will survive. But the question is, what happens actually to the fat that doesn't survive? Come on, let's go take a look. All right, so what happens to the fat? Here's what happens. So I really want you to kind of just sort of understand, because we hear of this fat just disappearing, 30% goes away, 20% goes away, 50% goes away. You know, we don't really know, but that's a whole different topic, and it varies from person to person. But what really happens when fat goes away? That's the question. And so I'm gonna just squeeze out a little bit of the fat. This is a little bit runny. This is kind of leftover fat that I didn't use from a BBL. And so here's the fat. And I put some out earlier just to kind of show you. Got rid of some of the fluid here that was in there. These are the little fat globules that get transferred when we do a BBL. And you can see they're all kind of different sizes. But if this fat doesn't survive, what does it do? Where does it go? How does it get there? Well, if you can imagine, let's say this fat doesn't survive because there's pressure going on. So you have pressure, you're going to be smushing those fat cells, and you're going to break those fat cells down. And then what you'll see is, you can kind of see it if you look back at this other one. You see this shiny, glistening appearance? That's like oil. And these fat cells that are here are filled with oil. And so what happens to fat that disappears, it doesn't really disappear, the fat cells die, and then they release the oil, and then your body's own immune system, your white cells, go in and they scavenge all that fat, and they basically, like a Pac-Man, go and, oh my God, I'm really dating myself, the Pac-Man. I hope everyone knows what Pac-Man is. Well, it goes with the Pac-Man, and it kind of, the little white blood cells, and it scavenges, it eats up all of the oil, it basically slurps it up. And then those white blood cells will go and take it to different parts of your body to dispose of it. Sometimes it goes to the liver, sometimes it goes to the kidneys, sometimes it goes through the blood system. So it'll go, and then your body will excrete it and get rid of it. So that's actually what happens to fat when we say that the fat doesn't survive. It's the fat cells, just like this one, that will get smushed either with pressure, or the other thing that can happen is, let's say that you have this little globule of fat here that gets put in, and you might not have really good blood supply, let's say, for the whole bit of fat to survive. And so maybe all of this part here survives, but a little bit on the edge doesn't survive because it doesn't establish a blood flow. So remember, in order for the fat to survive, it has to have blood supply. Everything that we do is dependent on blood supply. It's the most crucial part of what we do. When I move a nipple from one area to higher to do a breast lift, I'm worried about the blood supply. I have to cut things appropriately so the blood supply is preserved. When I do a BBL and we're putting fat into the butt, we want to make sure that you're doing it and you're spreading it out nice and evenly. You're not putting just a big blob of fat in there, so that those little fat cells can then reestablish themselves and get new blood supply. So it's all about blood supply. You know, people focus on like feeding the fat and things like that, but first of all, you're gonna make sure the fat survives. So obviously that's why we don't have patients sit, because if you sit after BBL, it's like having that pressure on the fat, and that will kill the fat. It'll prevent the blood supply from coming in, and it'll physically kill the cell. It's the same thing that happens with like Kybella or these other mesotherapy agents, where you inject a toxin into the fat, and the toxin does the same thing. The toxin will actually kill the fat cells. The toxin will actually break open the fat cell, and the fat cell will release that oil, and that fat cell's gone. Your white blood cells come in, they mop up the project, and then things go on. I don't like those products because They're not as accurate as with lipo. When I do lipo, I know it can actually remove the fat cells exactly where I want them to be removed and leave the fat cells where I want them. That's why I'm not a big fan of those injectable therapies for killing fat. But that's what happens. The fat dies, turns into oil, your body cleans it up, and everything heals nicely. And one other thing, and that is, you know, it doesn't happen often, but you can have patients with oil cysts, and I think I've videoed and I have posted some of those videos where you see me actually, you know, removing the oil with a syringe. And it's the same thing. If you had like a big glob of fat or a little bit more fat cells and none of that fat survived in that area, and it was kind of too much oil was generated too quickly to allow your white blood cells to come in and clean it all up, and so that oil kind of just collects there like as an oil cyst. Same thing with fat necrosis, is that you can have the little area that dies and it'll get calcified. Fat necrosis is a little bit different because the fat cells are not really being smushed and releasing their oil. The fat necrosis is more of a situation where you have some blood getting there, but not a lot. So they kind of go into this, they're not really dead, but they're not really alive. And then your body calcifies it. It kind of becomes this like little sort of soapy kind of mess. So fat necrosis is a little bit different. But when we talk about fat moving and leaving the body after a BBL, this is what we're talking about.